Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, March 6th, 2019. On today's show, we're going to answer some listener emails in the mailbag. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Soretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer Huatran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
It is raining hard here in Los Angeles. How's the weather there in New York City, HT?
It's freezing, but it's not bad otherwise. We just had a bunch of snow the past few days, but now it's just back to the normal dry freeze.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into the mailbag. Earlier this week, we talked about the Steven Spielberg Netflix situation, how Spielberg's trying to introduce new rules into the Academy to basically prevent Netflix from being eligible for, most of the awards. And we had a big discussion on that. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that episode. But at the end of that discussion, I kind of asked the listeners out there to explain this to me because we kind of couldn't see Spielberg's side on this. So we got a bunch of emails. I'm going to read a few of them. We'll start first with Austin from Dallas, Texas. He said that he leans towards Spielberg's side on this. He says that Netflix, he says that the Oscars to him is a particular medium, just like the Emmys are, and Netflix was using a loophole intended for shorts and indie films to their advantage. I feel like they should have a wide release of their films to qualify. I don't know how you put the rules in place to not exclude indie films, though. So I guess the question to you guys is, is that a fair, if they were to put a stipulation in that, studio releases have to be wide releases, is that fair?
I want to hear what HT has to say about this, because I haven't heard her opinion on this whole thing.
Yeah, this is an interesting subject that I don't really know how I feel about it still. I am wary of Netflix as a company and how they treat their movies, just because I don't think that putting their movies on the streaming service is a good way to advertise them or really make people see them as films. I know a lot of people who watch movies on Netflix and don't have any context and just see it as a Netflix film, and they do have a lesser opinion of those films because they are Netflix films. And so I feel like there's a sort of changing dynamic with Netflix films at the moment. To
interrupt you really quickly, I do want to clarify something we didn't say on our last podcast, that I don't think Netflix is trying to claim that their films that are not shown theatrically should be nominated for Academy Awards. I don't think that's what's at question here. It's the ones that they are actually, giving a limited release, like Roma and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the thing is, films that are trying to get into the Oscar conversation, the Oscar race, do get those limited releases too. I've seen films, foreign films especially, that are trying to get to the conversation have a 2-week release in just LA or New York. And that's something similar to what Netflix does with the films that they're trying to get for Oscar contention. So I don't really see the difference with this particular question.
I think he's suggesting that that the Academy should put in a way so that independent films or foreign films, like the ones you're suggesting, could still have those Oscar qualifying releases, but somehow, studio films, which would include Netflix, would have to commit to a wide release to qualify for an Oscar.
I mean, that's similar to what Cannes was trying to implement with Netflix as well, and that I can't remember the exact rules, but they needed at least I think a 2-month theatrical run time before they actually get to qualify to be in competition at Cannes.
Yeah.
So that was something that Netflix didn't want to abide by at first, because they were going with they were really sticking by their day and date release, but it seems like they're reneging a little bit with the Oscars too, because they did a 2-week window for Roma in theaters before they actually put the film on streaming. So what am I trying to say is yes and no. I kind of understand what he's trying to say, and I do think that Netflix is sort of, I guess, sliding by not abiding by all the other rules that studios do. But is it really that important for, like, do we really need all of those rules just for like Oscar contention?
I don't.
Yeah, and there's
think
also
so.
there's also I saw I think it was Phil Nobile Jr., the editor in chief of Fangoria magazine, tweeted this the other day, and I'd never realized this, but he said that Ed Wood, the 1994 Tim Burton movie, was only in theaters for 3 weeks because it performed so poorly at the box office that the studio pulled it, and then that movie ended up winning 2 Oscars. So I think the conversation right now is Spielberg, or I guess like the rumors, I'm not exactly sure where this information came from, but the conversation seems to be that movies need to have like a 4-week run in theaters for them to be eligible or something. That's part of this conversation, this whole swirling series of events. And under those rules, even a previous Oscar-winning movie from a major studio wouldn't have qualified, not even talking about Netflix at all. So I don't know. A lot of this just seems sort of arbitrary. I don't know.
I think on the other side, too, one thing that frustrates me about like abiding by these more, traditional rules is that the really phenomenal Jennifer Fox film The Tale, which debuted at Sundance and it's like a proper film, was picked up by HBO and thus was categorized as a TV movie and was up for Emmys. And I think it could have, if it had enough like of a theatrical run, or if it had enough buzz, it could have been like in the Oscar conversation. Laura Dern is amazing in this film, and she only got like an Emmy nomination for it, which I felt like was unfair because this is a film that debuted at a film festival and yet is being categorized as a TV movie because it was on HBO. So I think that it goes the other way as well.
Well, I mean, HBO could have tried a theatrical release of that, like a 2-week window to try to get that, but HBO doesn't do that. I'm wondering, do you guys think that the Academy should? I know this is opening a new door. We don't need more categories, but maybe like a best, non-theatrical feature film category.
That's interesting. Then, I don't know. I mean, that's sort of like the same conversation that we were having about the popular Oscar thing. Is like, then it might be seen as like a lesser award. Like people could try to corner the market on. Man, this is such a complicated conversation. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm leaning against it as well because it does feel like it's separating these films by a very arbitrary measure, like whether they got picked up by a studio versus a streaming service, because like they could be of the same quality. Like Roma, for example, to categorize it just as a streaming film feels like it is reductive of what that movie actually is.
Yeah. I want to respond to Austin's question, and I think you need one set of rules for all films. Right? Like, I think here's the qualifications to get nominated for any of these Academy Awards. And there can't be like, oh, well, if it's an indie, you only have to do 2 weeks. Do you know what I mean? Like, that seems BS to me. Like, I feel like a film should be a film should be a film. And, if it has to be a film that plays theatrical, which, has been what it's been for all of time thus far, that's fine. Have that 2-week limited rule, but I don't know. I don't see the advantage of extending that to 4 weeks because that could, some of these smaller films, your favorite film of last year, HT. I think if you extended that to 4 weeks, maybe that would hurt some of those films. Some of those films can't afford that, know. So, like, I feel like that would be doing them a disjustice, and I don't think we should be, separating two categories of studio films and independent, whatever. Okay, let's move on to another. We have a bunch of emails here, so I want to get to all of them. Langdon Kessner writes in that he thinks it's important to know. He kind of felt he was annoyed at watching Film Twitter and seeing the argument going from Spielberg hates Netflix to Spielberg doesn't care about minorities, both of which he says is not true. Quote, for starters, it's important to note, I'm surprised this wasn't mentioned on the podcast, Spielberg was a huge part of getting Five Came Back, a documentary produced by Netflix. It would not exist without him. So the idea that Spielberg just hates Netflix and is a cartoon grandpa yelling at the clouds is ridiculous. Not saying that you guys pushed this idea, but social media did. The issue here is that the way Netflix treats their movies, and more importantly the theaters, not many of them have been given a proper theatrical release, and even the ones that do come with rules from Netflix. Oh, we'll get to this in a second. I do want to respond to this, like, Spielberg hates Netflix, hates minorities thing. I think we touched upon it a little bit, but I don't think we were trying to perpetrate that that line of thinking. But that line of thinking, I don't think was even that Spielberg hates minorities, but Spielberg, I think the line of thinking that was coming from film Twitter, being very, I got to clarify there, is that those stories don't belong on the big screen. Those stories belong on the small screen. So Spielberg getting Five Came Back on Netflix doesn't, go against that line of theory. Am I correct? And I'm not saying that we agree upon that line of theory, but like.
So you're saying that just the idea that Spielberg produced Five Came Back doesn't offset the notion that he might have a blind spot when it comes to how difficult it is for minorities to get movies made? Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah. No. And again, I'm not saying I don't like HC. You haven't talked about this, but I'm assuming you don't believe that, right?
No, I do think that film Twitter per se has does have a point in that he has a history of like not quite supporting as many minorities as he does people who he kind of sees himself in. But I don't think that's like a huge character flaw. I think that that's something that is like a big attack. What am I trying to say? It's not something that's like a big issue with Spielberg per se. It's like something that's maybe like, it's a blind spot, I think.
Yeah, it's not intentional. It's unintentional. I think that he's just in his own bubble where he does not see how hard it is for groups that are not white male to direct and have their stories told on the big screen. And, a lot of the stories are being told by a company like Netflix. They're being very progressive about that. And let's not read this the wrong way. Netflix is not this good doer that wants to see diverse opinions out there. They're doing it because they want to make money, and they see that Hollywood has been missing this opportunity for so long, so they're trying to take advantage of this opportunity. So they're not like, Mother Teresa or anything like that. But yeah, I think that's the point here. But he goes on to say that the issue here is where the way Netflix treats the movies, and more importantly, the theaters. Not many of them have been given proper theatrical release, and even the ones that do come with rules from Netflix. I want to respond to that because I feel like Netflix has said since day one that they wanted their films, not even just the Oscar films, but a lot of their films to premiere in theaters day and date with the films, streaming on Netflix. But it's been the exhibitors who have been pushing back at that. Is Netflix to blame here, Ben?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's Netflix, I'm sure would appreciate the opportunity to put a lot of these movies in theaters. I don't know. I guess I could be just projecting onto them, but from what I've seen before, with the idea that they've put out all these movies in limited release, it seems like they're okay with the theatrical experience. It's the exhibitors that don't want the movies playing on Netflix at the same time, and that's been the issue from the very beginning. So I think Netflix is trying to they want people to subscribe and pay for their service, and the reward that they're giving people for doing that is having early or instant access to these movies as soon as they premiere. They don't want it to be like a traditional home entertainment release like the studios where there's a 90-day window or whatever. So yeah, I think Netflix has shown that they want things in theaters as long as it can be on Netflix at the same time, and that's where the exhibitors have a big problem.
Yeah. I think also Netflix sees that many more people are going to see a film on Netflix in its first week on Netflix than would see it in a wide release in theaters. And
Netflix loses money too whenever they try to put a movie in theaters, because they do have to, because exhibitors don't cooperate with them, they have to end up buying theaters, for example, to actually, or buying screens to show the films. But I do think that I do take issue too with like Netflix's really hard day and day release, because I feel like if they do want to, like, I don't know, spread their films and distribute their films more, then they might want to play more friendly with exhibitors rather than just kind of being like, oh, this is just how we make money and this is how we're doing things.
What and also advantage do they get from showing their films in theaters? Like, I feel like if I'm Netflix and I'm like, 100% of my revenue comes from my, the subscribers that subscribe to the service. Why put it in theaters where you're making subscribers, I would say the vast majority of subscribers angry, because then like, oh, I got to go to theaters for a month to see it before it's on the service. You're making it for us. And then you don't even make, big millions of dollars. Like what is the advantage for Netflix?
I guess credibility. That's the only thing that I can see, like, that I kind of think of it as, because there is that thought that Netflix films are like lesser because they're not released in theaters. Like we've talked about this before, where they have that kind of sheen of that straight to video sort of label, but putting in theaters kind of gives them more of that prestige in a way, even if it's monetarily like disadvantageous for them. So yeah, I don't know. It's like, and also I just don't like the fact that they are like not transparent, both when they release films in the theaters, and like they don't report box office numbers, in addition to not reporting their numbers for the streaming service too. Mm-hmm. So I have mixed feelings about this, because I do like that Netflix is able to reach more people through their streaming service, and that a lot of people who are low income and aren't able to go to theaters and see these movies are able to reach them on Netflix. But yeah, like you were saying before, Peter, I don't think Netflix is Mother Teresa in their attempts to bring more people to movies.
Oh, not at all. My question to you though is, do you think this is just a feeling that we have about Netflix movies now? Like, I feel like, 20 years ago, if HBO made an original TV show, we would, or, a movie for TV, like back then there was more of a stigma there. Now when they have originals, it's prestige stuff. And, even honestly, even 2 years ago, if you told me YouTube was going to make a TV series that I would care about, I would have laughed at you. And it was my favorite TV series last year was Cobra Kai. Even when Netflix came into the original game, I kind of like blew it off and thought of it as a much lesser than. And now, I know they make a lot of bad content, but the best of the best is up there with the stuff that's being produced on, premium cable. So like, is it going to be just a matter of time that we like don't look at it as like lesser than TV movies?
Potentially. I mean, I do think that they're a great source for just like for so much good content, good movies and TV shows. Although they do have a tendency to just buy out everything. And I feel like a lot of it is just the amount of things they're throwing at the wall. Of course, there's going to be some good things.
Yeah.
But I'd
be curious what the percentage there is. It's probably a very small percentage.
Yeah. I think they do need to change their transparency practices, like at least for me to embrace them more, even though I would never delete my Netflix account because I rely on it so much. I feel like in order to be taken more seriously And to play ball with the bigwigs as they're trying to do now, they need to act more like a movie studio and less like a tech company.
It does kind of seem like a flex on their part, this entire thing. Like, can we get away with winning an Oscar on, by playing by our rules instead of playing by everybody else's rules? And they won several Oscars for Roma, but not Best Picture, which is what they're clearly gunning for. So it remains to be seen, I think, for me anyway, whether or not they're going to do what HT said and like actually start to open up and try to gain a little bit more credibility in the industry, or just like double down and try to like force that credibility by winning the Oscar on their own terms.
I really wish Netflix would release figures and stuff, because I really wonder, does the Oscar matter for them? Like, I do understand that it matters in traditional distribution, and it does help any film that gets, nominated or, never mind wins, but, gets a boost at the box office from that, award buzz. But I'm really wondering, like, did that many people more see Roma on Netflix because of the award consideration?
I don't think it's about the movies at all. I think it's just about the prestige associated with the brand, right? I think it's like the space race right now with these streaming services trying to be the first one to win Best Picture. Like Amazon came close with Manchester by the Sea winning Best Screenplay a couple years ago. And I think Netflix is just, they spent it was like $25 million on the campaign for Roma. So they clearly want it. And I don't think it's about, oh yeah, if we win the Oscar, way more people are going to, log into Netflix and watch Roma. I don't think they care about that at all. You
don't think it's about the money? I feel like everything driving this is about money.
Well, I think it's about them saying, boosting the brand and creating prestige around the brand and saying, we're Netflix, we've won X amount of Oscars, versus look at what our streaming competitors have done, and here's why you should subscribe to our service, because we're a legitimate entertainment option, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be interesting if Netflix just decided to say, F it, we're we don't need the Oscars, and just be like, we're not going to release things theatrically until, go back to their guns of like, we're not going to release things theatrically unless we can release a day and date and give it to our subscribers at the same time that it hits theaters. Like, I feel like as much as that would piss people off, I feel like that would be the tech company stance, right?
They should give up on the Oscars entirely and create their own Oscars and call it like the Flixie Awards or something.
Yeah. I mean, I'm waiting for them to still, buy a theater chain or do that. Like, I feel like that's going to be the future of Netflix. Is your Netflix subscription is going to get you both, the streaming service and into, seeing it in theaters. And if you don't have a subscription, you got to pay for the ticket, which I think could be interesting. And it would be a way for them to bypass all these, all these troubles. Okay, we have one last question. This is from Mark B. from London. And he writes in with the suggestion, like he says, I wanted to suggest the way of diffusing the stupid spat over Netflix's place in the industry, maybe best served by just canceling the Oscars completely. I think the world in general, although definitely not Hollywood, could suffer the tragic loss of the mass backslapping effort, which is the Academy Awards. So Mark is basically just, I guess, suggesting that they should cancel the Academy Awards. What do you guys think?
Flixies, baby. You can't cancel the Oscars. That's ridiculous.
I'm one of the few people who actually still loves the Oscars despite the mess that was this year's awards, because I always feel like it's a place to appreciate and love movies still, despite it being so political and despite it being this just big, pissing contest for a lot of people. I do think that it helps me like cultivate a love for movies and like learn about new movies. And I think it's an essential part of that.
Yeah.
That circle, despite it, having that being so poisonous lately.
I just
Yeah,
wish
I think you gotta have the Oscars. It's a time capsule, if nothing else. It's a cultural landmark, and it's like one of the biggest traditions in the industry. And yes, it started as a way to just sort of like placate actors because they were complaining about work practices and stuff like that. But it's become something larger than what it started out as. And I think, looking back on all of the winners is like instructive and educational, and it paints a picture of where we are societally that I think is important, and I don't think you can just get rid of them.
Yeah, I think he's being a little facetious here. I just wish the Oscars would, looking forward, I wish they would be more inclusive and not exclusive, and I feel like that exclusive is what's turning people off to the Oscars now, and adding more rules to prevent the films that probably people are seeing more of these films than a lot of the films that are hitting the theaters. I feel like, if you want, what did you say? Like, it provides a snapshot of this like year. Like, I feel like looking back on, last year, it'd be impossible to look back on that and not think about Roma. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was part of that year. And like, I feel like Netflix, as they get bigger and bigger and they're just growing, they're going to be more and more a part of that cinema conversation, even if they aren't showing their movies in cinemas. So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like the Academy just needs to, and Steven Spielberg needs to accept what the future is and not be so worried about the possible consequences to the theatrical experience. But I'm going to add one more question on here, guys. We have one more email from Chris from New York City, one of your neighbors there, HT. And he writes in that, like a lot of people on his Twitter stream, he's basically, it's basically bloated with politics, hysteria, crazed propaganda, and other nightmares. So, like a lot of people, I find I kind of hate Twitter. You guys talk a lot about film Twitter, something we mentioned earlier in this podcast, when people discuss filmmaking and movie news, and that sounds like a lot of fun. Can you give me any insight on who to follow, lists to follow, etc., so I can nuke my current Twitter account and start over with film Twitter? So, what advice do we have to anybody that wants to follow film Twitter? Like, what even is film Twitter?
That's a good question. I feel like it's not very like clearly defined, but once you're in it, you're in it.
Yeah.
But I would recommend following all the writers of slashfilm.com.
Yes. I think it's fair, like, if you... Yes, follow all the writers of Slash Film, and then, like, maybe go and look at who they're following. And a lot of the people who are following are kind of in that film Twitter bubble. It's funny that this guy that Chris wants to get invested in film Twitter, because I feel like film Twitter is generally used as, like, an insult. Right? Like, it's not usually used positively. Like it's usually used to describe that, like, this bubble is, like, has this weird viewpoint on something that the mass, the general audiences don't. In generally a bad way. Am I wrong?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it is used that way, but there's so much intelligent writing that is can be found within the because it's basically just all of the writers for all of the websites that you read. That is film Twitter to me. So people like Angie Han and Joanna Robinson, and I mean the list is insane, and I'm sure somebody out there has made a list of film Twitter. David Ehrlich, and I feel like if you follow those people, and maybe like Scott Wampler, and I'm trying to think of like a couple others off the top of my head, and then just see who they're talking to all day and follow those people, very quickly you will have the entirety of film Twitter, because it's all like, that's all, everybody just talks to each other and argues about movies all day and shares great stuff about movies and brilliant articles. So I feel like there's a lot of good to be had in there. But yes, like any other societal grouping, it certainly is a bubble, and can seem like that when everybody shares the same opinion about something, and it doesn't reflect what's going on in the larger movie-going world. But I still think there's a huge value to paying attention to those conversations, and because there's so much intelligent thought that goes into them.
Yeah, I've enjoyed being a part of Film Twitter because of finding like-minded people who share my interests and share my just like passions for things. So I think that even if there are drawbacks to that and being in that bubble and kind of having that echo chamber, it's a lot of fun just to see and talk to and meet people online who are all passionate about the same things that you are, which are movies. But actually, I do have a recommendation for a list if you want to follow one. And One Perfect Shot Twitter actually created a Film Twitter TM public list, which you can follow. So that's the One Perfect Shot Twitter is just that handle.
We will put that in. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, just so someone doesn't have to like look all that up to that list that you're talking about.
Yes.
But I do want to warn you that like just because you're part of you're watching Film Twitter doesn't mean you're not going to get the politics, and you're not going to get the the arguing and hysteria. Like I feel like if I was a fan of Donald Trump, I would not want to be part of Film Twitter. if I was not liberal, I probably wouldn't want to be a part of Film Twitter because it is a very one-sided conversation. So if you're listening to this and you are of the right side, maybe don't follow Film Twitter because there's a lot of opinions that kind of agree on things in those respects, if that makes sense. Yeah. Anyways, you can find all of us on Twitter. You can find me at /film. You can find HT. What are you? H-Tran-Bui?
H-Tran-Bui.
And Ben, you're Ben Pears?
Ben Pears, yes.
Yeah. You can find all of our work at /film.com. This podcast, /film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@/film.com, and maybe your letter can appear in the next edition of the Mailbag. And please leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. And go head on over to our iTunes page, write us 2 sentences, give us a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.